They say it's never too late to find love again. But what if it is? What if the pressure to couple up after 65, so romanticized by greeting cards and old friends with opinions, actually disrupts the one thing you finally earned, inner peace? Welcome, dear soul, to Buddhist wisdom for the elderly, where we don't just grow old, we wake up slowly, with tea and intention. Now, we're not anti-love, we're just pro-clarity. And in today's video, we're exploring 9 surprising reasons why staying single later in life might not be sad, but sacred. These are daily lessons hidden in plain sight, things you live but might not fully see. And don't miss reason 3, the quiet centerpiece of it all, how protecting your morning routine is actually a spiritual act. Yes, your tea ritual may be more important than your dating profile, so stay, like, and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 peaceful souls who believe aging well is about living wisely, not loudly. Let's walk this path together. Reason 1. Your money equals your medicine, your meals, and your peace of mind. There comes a point in life, usually around the same time you start putting on your glasses to find your other glasses, when you realize something quietly powerful. Money isn't just money anymore. It's your medicine, your meals, your margin for rest. It's peace of mind in practical form. And when someone new comes into your life, especially in the form of a partner, it doesn't take long for things to get complicated. Not because either of you is unkind, just because money brings its own energy into the room and it always wants a seat at the table. In your younger years, maybe there was time to recover from financial bumps. A shared credit card here, a new car you couldn't quite afford there. You figured it out, rebuilt, worked weekends. But after 65, that kind of flexibility disappears. Your income might be fixed. Your expenses are more predictable, but also more essential. There's less room for experiments and second chances. You're no longer playing Monopoly. You're protecting the little island of peace you've spent decades building. And inviting someone into that space, financially, can quietly invite stress. Not right away, not dramatically, but in small, disorienting ways. Suddenly, your spending habits come under review. Your bank account becomes a group project. That small splurge at the grocery store? Now it's a conversation, a negotiation, maybe even a disagreement. Let me tell you about Roger. He was 68, newly widowed, and met an old friend from school. Things moved quickly, as they sometimes do when time feels more precious. She moved in. At first, it felt like companionship, a second chance. But then came the little leaks in the budget. Fancy dinners, new decor, shared costs that somehow weren't quite shared. Roger didn't mind at first, until he looked at his retirement account and realized it had started shrinking faster than expected. He wasn't angry, just uneasy. And unease at this stage of life is too expensive to ignore. Because here's the real cost. You start worrying about money again. You second-guess your choices. You hesitate before helping your grandchild with tuition or planning that trip you always promised yourself. That's not freedom. That's financial entanglement. And it's not just the day-to-day stuff. A new relationship can affect everything from tax status to healthcare coverage to estate planning. Suddenly, you're wondering if a new connection might alter what you leave behind, or how your children see you. None of this means relationships are wrong, but if you do choose to enter one, it has to be conscious, clear, respectful of the quiet architecture you've built around your needs. Because your money, it's not just currency. It's clarity. It's the ability to say yes when you mean yes and no without guilt. It's your independence dressed in numbers and receipts. Staying single doesn't mean you're hoarding. It means you're choosing to direct your resources where they matter most, to your health, your joy, your peace. You've spent a lifetime building this nest. You don't need someone stepping into it and rearranging the sticks. Reason 2. Peace is the new passion. Emotional drama just costs too much. There's a strange thing that happens after 65. It creeps in quietly, like afternoon sunlight through a curtain. You start to crave calm the way you once craved excitement. Not because you've lost your spark. No, it's because you've learned what it costs to keep feeding the fire. See, when you're younger, relationships thrive on the dramatic. You cry, you kiss, you fight about nothing, and it all feels deliciously alive. But later on, that same emotional intensity feels more like heartburn. It's not that you can't love anymore. It's just that now, your body files every disagreement under possible health concern. One argument, and suddenly your chest tightens, your sleep disappears, and your thoughts pace around your brain like it's a studio apartment with no exit. Let me tell you about Eleanor. She's 78, fierce, peaceful, lives alone, happily. She once said the quiet after her second husband passed didn't feel like absence. It felt like exhale. For the first time in years, no moods to manage, no eggshells to tiptoe over. Just her thoughts, her tea, her dog, and peace. Not the kind of peace you post on Instagram, the kind you feel in your gut, the kind that's worth protecting. And here's something the body knows even when the mind forgets. Peace is healing. You don't bounce back from stress the same way at 70 that you did at 35. The hormones that surge during arguments take longer to settle. Your sleep is lighter, more easily disturbed. Your emotional resilience isn't gone. It's just more selective about how it's spent. That's not weakness. That's not weakness. It's your body saying, let's not do that again. And yet, the world keeps telling you that being partnered is the ultimate prize. That if you're not wrapped around someone by sunset, you've failed at the game of love. But the deeper truth is this. Being alone doesn't mean you're empty. Sometimes it means you're finally full. Full of your own presence. Full of your own rhythm. Full of stillness that no one else can rearrange. There's nothing wrong with wanting connection. But it's worth asking, does this connection feed your nervous system or fry it? Does it make you feel safe in your own skin? Or like you're slowly disappearing to keep the peace? At a certain point, you stop wanting to be someone's other half. You just want to be whole. So if you find yourself loving the way your home feels when no one's talking over your thoughts, or the way your body softens when you're not managing anyone else's moods, that's not loneliness. That's freedom. And freedom, at this stage, is the real love story. Reason 3, the sacred routine. Why your morning tea is a spiritual practice. There's a quiet kind of joy that settles into life after 65. You wake up and the sun is just right through the kitchen window. The tea is steeping, the dog is asleep, and your slippers know exactly where your feet are going before you do. That's not just routine, that's ritual. And when you've been living on this earth for 7 or 8 decades, those rituals become sacred. Not in the incense and chanting sense, though hey, if that's your thing, go for it. But in the this is what keeps me sane kind of way. Every morning cup of tea, every walk at dusk, every crossword puzzle at precisely 2 p.m. becomes a thread in the fabric of your peace. They are the things that no longer feel negotiable, not because you're rigid, but because you've finally figured out what works. Now enter a new partner. They're nice. They mean well. But they like jazz in the morning instead of silence. They rearrange your kitchen for efficiency. They sleep in. They talk over the weather report. They put their socks in the wrong drawer, the one you've been using for hand towels since the Reagan administration. It's subtle. They're not doing anything wrong exactly. But slowly, your rhythm, your hard-earned, carefully tuned rhythm, starts to get interrupted. And not in a cute rom-com kind of way. In a way that makes you feel like your life is being slowly, lovingly hijacked. This is what happened to Louise. She'd been living alone for 10 years, and she loved her life. She woke early, made her tea, journaled in the garden. She had a rhythm that made her feel grounded. Then she met someone. He was lovely. They took weekend trips and shared stories over dinner. But once he started staying over more regularly, things shifted. He liked loud TV in the mornings. He didn't understand why she needed to journal before breakfast. He started rearranging furniture, small things at first, then the bookshelves. And one day, Louise sat on the edge of her bed and realized she felt like a guest in her own home. That's when it hit her. Her peace had been in the little things. The small daily moments that no one else saw but meant everything to her. The truth is, our routines are not just habits, they're anchors. They're the scaffolding that holds us steady in a world that keeps changing shape. And when someone comes in, even lovingly, and starts shifting those anchors, it can leave you unmoored. Staying single means you don't have to explain why you need silence until 9 a.m., or why breakfast must be toast, not conversation. It means you get to move through your day without negotiating every cup, every channel, every drawer. There's a peace that lives in your rhythm, and it's hard-won. It's not selfish to protect it. It's sacred stewardship. You've earned the right to wake up and move through your morning exactly how you like it, without compromise, commentary, or confusion. And if that means tea, silence, and the same seat on the porch every morning for the rest of your life, sounds like freedom to me. Reason 4. Emotional third parties. When love means losing family. Love stories later in life are rarely just between two people. Oh, in the beginning, it might feel that way. You meet someone, you laugh over soup, you both like the same decade of music. Maybe they even remember what rotary phones were. It's sweet, it's simple. It's two consenting adults rediscovering connection. But just when things start to feel cozy, the door creaks open, and in walks the entire extended family, uninvited. Because here's what no one tells you. Every new relationship you enter after 65 brings ghosts with it. Adult children, grandchildren, old wounds, inheritance concerns, history. You're not just falling in love with a person. You're bumping into someone's estate plan, their late spouse's memory, and possibly their skeptical daughter who thinks you're moving too fast. Take Martha, for example. She was 66 and had just started seeing a retired professor named Jim. They both loved books, silence, and trains that arrived on time. It was the kind of easy companionship she thought she'd never find again. But when she mentioned him to her sons, the reaction was, cool. First it was awkward silences, then subtle questions. Are you sure he's not after your house? Is he helping you manage your medication? Are you changing your will? Suddenly, her quiet joy became a source of tension. Her kids stopped calling as much. Her daughter-in-law grew distant. One of her grandkids asked, "Is that man going to take my room?" And just like that, Martha had a choice no one should have to make. Her peace or her family's approval. She ended it, not because she didn't care for Jim, but because the emotional cost of holding the middle between love and loyalty was just too high. Here's what happens. Children worry. Sometimes out of love, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of resentment they haven't admitted to themselves. Add in money, property, and legacy, and even the calmest family can become a courtroom. That doesn't make anyone bad, it just makes them human. But it does raise a spiritual question. How much energy do you want to spend defending your choices in this chapter of your life? You've raised kids, paid bills, lost sleep, put your own needs second. Third, sometimes last. Now, finally, you get a little space to breathe. And then suddenly, everyone's got an opinion on who's sitting at your kitchen table. Staying single can help sidestep that whole circus. It lets you keep family relationships clear and steady. It avoids accidental drama about wills, property, or bedroom drawers. You remain the lighthouse, not the lightning rod. Because, let's be honest, your presence in your family's life is too important to let bitterness creep in through the back door of, who's this new person and what do they want? Being single doesn't mean you're alone. It means you're in the center of your own life, not defending it from a witness stand. And that's worth protecting. Reason 5, from lover to nurse, the hidden caregiving trap. There's something no one tells you when you start dating after 65. They talk about companionship, shared interests, dinner dates, holding hands in the grocery store. But what they don't mention is this. Sometimes you go looking for love and wake up in a hospital waiting room filling out someone else's paperwork. It doesn't always start that way, of course. At first, there's a spark, a sweet connection. You're both relatively healthy. You take walks, share meals, maybe even plan a trip. And then one day they need help. A ride to the doctor, an extra hand with the laundry, a reminder to take their pills. It's nothing, you think, a small favor. Until suddenly, you're bathing someone, managing medications, canceling plans, and your quiet, peaceful retirement has quietly turned into a second full-time job. That's what happened to George. George was 76 when he met Ruth. They hit it off at a local choir rehearsal. She was smart, spiritual, and smelled like lavender. Within months, they were living together. Life felt warm again, but then Ruth started having trouble with her knees, then her back, then her memory. One appointment turned into 5. George found himself cooking all the meals, managing pill schedules, and cleaning the house while watching her doze in and out of pain. He never stopped caring. But caring became all he did. His blood pressure rose. He stopped attending community events. His own sleep became patchy. And one morning he looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man who used to laugh so easily. Now let's pause here because this is important. There is no shame in caregiving. It can be a deeply meaningful act of love. But if you don't choose it consciously, if it sneaks in through the back door while you're busy making tea, it can erode your own health and joy without asking permission. Because here's the truth. At this stage of life, your energy is no longer endless. It's precious. You only have so much to give before your own body starts whispering, "Please, I need care too." And if you're not careful, the person you end up neglecting is yourself. Being single doesn't mean you're incapable of caring for others. It means you recognize your limits. It means you've learned that love doesn't always require a merger. Sometimes it means cheering someone on from the edge of your own well-being. Because let's face it, most of us spent the first half of our lives taking care of others. Kids, jobs, families, crises. We gave, and gave, and gave. And now, maybe this chapter is about something else. Not selfishness, but self-honoring. Staying single gives you space to prioritize your own health without guilt, to rest when you need it, to live on your terms, and to offer care when you do, from overflow, not from depletion. You're allowed to love people without becoming their lifeline. You're allowed to choose ease over exhaustion. And you're allowed to say, with a clear heart, "I've done my time in the trenches. Now I choose peace." Reason 6. You don't have to be in love to be deeply connected. There's a myth floating around out there. Quiet, persistent, and sticky. It says, if you don't have a romantic partner, you're missing something essential. As if love only counts when it arrives with matching coffee mugs and a joint bank account. But here's the truth most people don't discover until they stop chasing the perfect relationship. You don't have to be in love to be deeply connected. In fact, some of the most soulful, life-affirming connections happen outside of romance altogether. They happen at the dog park, in a yoga class, at the community center over backgammon and badly brewed coffee. They happen between friends who've known you through 6 hairstyles and 2 crises. Between you and your neighbor who always brings the mail up to your porch without being asked. Between you and a tree you pass on your morning walk. And yes, between you and yourself. This isn't just spiritual fluff, it's science. Studies on aging show that social connection, not necessarily romantic, is one of the strongest predictors of longevity, emotional well-being, and even cognitive resilience. And here's the liberating part. When you stop waiting for that one special someone, you start seeing everyone as sacred. Every smile, every shared laugh, every quiet nod of understanding becomes its own kind of love story. This is what happened to Iris. She's 72, widowed twice, and absolutely thriving. She gardens. She runs a little poetry club at the library. She has a circle of friends who cook together once a week. Everyone brings a dish and a story. No romance, no candlelit declarations, just laughter, connection, and soup. She once told me, "I don't need someone to complete me. I just need someone to pass me the salt and ask how my tomatoes are doing." Because real connection isn't about possession. It's about presence. It's not about having someone sleep next to you every night. It's about knowing someone would notice if you weren't there. You don't have to settle for a relationship that feels thin and draining just because it checks the not alone box. Being single opens the door to a wider love. Love that's not limited by title or expectation. Love that shows up in places you'd never think to look. On a park bench, in a shared laugh, in a moment of eye contact that says, "I see you." So no, you don't need to be in love to be deeply connected. You just need to stay open, stay curious, stay real, and maybe, just maybe, realize that the most important connection you'll ever have is the one you've been building with yourself all along. Reason 7. Freedom isn't a perk, it's a soul-level need. There's a kind of freedom you earn after 65 that no one quite prepares you for. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't show up in headlines. It sneaks in with the simple joy of eating cereal for dinner and not explaining it to anyone. You wake up when you're ready. You stretch, you talk to the dog, you water the plants, or you don't. You don't need permission, validation, or feedback. The thermostat is set exactly where you like it. The radio is on the station you trust, and your time is your own. That isn't luxury, that's liberation. But here's what happens when a partner enters the picture. Your freedom quietly starts to shrink. Not out of malice, not even on purpose. It just happens. Suddenly, your time becomes shared. Your silence becomes optional. Your plans start bending around someone else's mood, energy level, or sleep habits. The living room gets rearranged. The fridge is full of food you didn't pick. The remote has new fingerprints on it. And somewhere between, "Sure, we can eat earlier," and "I'll cancel my walk so we can go shopping," you start noticing the walls closing in. Not physically, but energetically. This is what happened to Walter. Walter had just retired, 74, sharp as ever, with a list of places he wanted to visit by train. He loved the idea of slow travel, seeing the world through a window, reading paperbacks in quiet stations. Then he met someone. She was kind, practical, good company, but she didn't like traveling. Planes made her nervous. Trains were too cold. She liked staying in. Familiar restaurants, safe routines. At first, Walter compromised. It felt small. It felt like love. But 6 months in, he looked at his untouched suitcase and felt a tiny grief. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because he had begun trading his freedom for harmony. And at this stage of life, that kind of trade, no matter how gentle, starts to feel heavier than it used to. Because freedom isn't just a preference anymore. It's a spiritual requirement. You've spent your life making room for others. Now, maybe the sacred work is making room for yourself. Being single doesn't mean isolating. It doesn't mean shutting out love or connection. It just means your life is no longer up for negotiation. You want a quiet day? You get one. You want to travel? You book it. You want to eat pancakes for dinner while listening to jazz and doing a crossword in your pajamas at 6 p.m.? Done. And no one has to agree with you. No one even has to know. This is the kind of autonomy that lets your spirit breathe. It's not selfish, it's soulful. So if someone asks why you're still single, just smile and say, "I'm not single, I'm sovereign." Reason 8. Settling is the silent suicide of the spirit. There's a soft kind of panic that can creep in as you get older. It doesn't knock loudly, it doesn't shout, it whispers. What if this is your last chance? What if no one else ever comes along? What if you end up alone? And before you know it, you've said yes to someone who doesn't really light you up. You tell yourself it's fine. that maybe you're just being picky, that this is good enough, that you should be grateful. But here's the thing. Good enough is often the beginning of quiet suffering. It doesn't look like a red flag. It looks like a sigh. A dinner where you smile politely. A conversation where you nod but feel yourself drifting inside. It's that moment where you laugh at their joke, but something in your chest feels like it just got quieter. That's what happened to Barbara. She was 69, smart, spirited, still went dancing on Tuesdays. She met a man online, polite, punctual, looking for commitment. He ticked all the boxes, except he didn't really get her. He didn't laugh at her wild stories. He didn't ask about the books she loved. He called her dear a lot, and not in the endearing way. But all her friends were partnered. She was the only one showing up to events solo, and she started to feel the pressure. Not from others, but from inside herself. So she said yes. And for 6 months, she smiled at family dinners and played the part. But inside, she'd never felt more alone. Because that's the irony, isn't it? You can feel more isolated next to the wrong person than you ever did by yourself. And you don't need a crisis to realize it. Just a moment. One still, quiet moment where your inner voice says, "This isn't home." Settling isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the slow erosion of your spirit. Now here's where it gets spiritual. There's a part of us, call it the soul, the witness, the essence, that knows when we're not in alignment. It knows when we've compromised not out of compassion but out of fear. It knows when we're shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. And it doesn't scold us. It just waits, patiently, hoping we'll come back home to ourselves. Being single isn't a failure. It's a form of spiritual clarity. It means you've learned the difference between loneliness and longing. It means you no longer chase connection just to fill space. It means you've made peace with your own company, and you've realized that your heart is too sacred to barter for approval. Because love, real love, doesn't come from desperation. It comes from overflow. So if someone does enter your life, let it be because they add to your joy, not because they're supposed to rescue you from quiet. And if no one comes, that's okay too, because you're already whole, already home, already enough. Reason 9, your final chapter is your masterpiece. Don't let someone else hold the pen. Here's something most people don't want to say out loud. The last third of your life, it might be the most important part of your story. Not because it's flashy, not because it's filled with new careers or cliffhangers, but because it's where everything comes together. It's the chapter where the noise starts to fade and the truth becomes clearer. The regrets show up for their final conversation. The joys start aging like fine wine. And you get to ask, maybe for the first time ever, what do I want to say with the time I have left? Now, when you're partnered, especially later in life, something subtle can happen. Your days begin shaping themselves around someone else's patterns. Your time becomes shared, your space becomes negotiated, and your voice starts adjusting its volume to keep the peace. And without even noticing, you're no longer the one holding the pen. Instead of living your truth, you're editing it, trimming the parts that might cause friction, diluting your preferences to keep harmony, shaping your life around a connection that, while meaningful, may not reflect the fullness of who you've become. But here's the invitation. What if your final chapter could be your masterpiece? Not a compromise, not a quiet surrender, but a bold, true, beautiful reflection of your essence. This is what Henry decided. Henry was 71 when he realized he'd spent most of his life making it work with other people. First as a husband, then a father, then a caregiver. He was good at it, patient, thoughtful, always the one to smooth things over. But when his kids were grown and his house was quiet, he sat down one morning with a cup of coffee and asked himself, what would it look like to live without adjusting for someone else? He didn't mean it with anger. He meant it with curiosity. And what followed was a season of rediscovery. Painting again, traveling without permission slips, rearranging his living room just because, making breakfast at 10 a.m., letting the day unfold without someone else's timeline layered over it. He didn't need someone to complete him. He just needed space to be whole. Because that's the gift of this stage of life. You finally realize that your story is yours. You don't owe anyone a romance just to feel validated. You don't need a partner to be a main character. You don't have to share the page if it means losing your own handwriting. Being single after 65 isn't a sign of absence. It's a sign of authorship. It's choosing the quiet courage to live without apology. It's writing your final pages with intention, truth, and a rhythm that matches your own breath. So if love comes along and fits like a gentle punctuation mark, beautiful. But if not, that's not emptiness. That's white space. That's room for your soul to stretch out. And so, dear friend, we've wandered through the garden of quiet truths. We've seen how peace is more precious than passion, how your money is your medicine, how routine can be sacred, and how you don't need a partner to feel deeply connected. You just need to come home to yourself. These aren't just reasons to stay single. They're invitations to live more intentionally, more lightly, and more in tune with the quiet wisdom aging brings. So if something in you whispered yes today, if you felt seen or softened or even slightly unburdened, then let that be your sign to share this video, like it, or leave a comment with your own story. You never know who else needs to hear that solitude isn't a sentence, it's a sanctuary. And if you'd like more of this kind of medicine, go ahead and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep showing up. For your heart, your mind, and your tea. Until next time, may your home be quiet, your tea warm, and your peace untouched.